Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited about the topic that we have, and I won't take up too much of the time that we have for today's presentation. Excited that we have Allison and Charlene joining us from Nationwide. Nationwide is one of our newer partners, obviously not new to the insurance industry. And some of you on the call might have actually been working with Nationwide longer than we have. But I'm extremely excited about the partnership that we've had so far with Nationwide for a variety of reasons. Extremely competitive product portfolio that fills a lot of niches. And then, probably more importantly is just the communication and partnership that we've had with the sales team and other folks at Nationwide. So if you have not contracted with Nationwide through us, not familiar with the product portfolio, or want to learn more, certainly make a note to reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to explore that with you further. Quick housekeeping, you guys are all on mute today. The only reason for that is just to give us the cleanest possible audio for everybody listening live today. Just because we have you on mute doesn't necessarily mean that we don't want questions from you. So use that question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Put questions in there. I will be looking at that throughout the presentation. We'll have maybe one stopping point for questions that we'll go through and get questions answered that we get up to that point. And then we should have time at the end to answer any remaining questions. If for any reason there's questions that we don't get to, we'll certainly make a note of those and make sure that we get those answered with you directly. But the other thing that I'll mention, I mention this anytime I get a chance to talk to anybody, just because I want you to be able to take advantage of the production that you already have with us, is our Shared Success Program. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just a way to get extra rewards for the production that you have with us. If you're not familiar with that, go out to our website, www.financial-brokerage.com. Use the incentive tab to click through and see all the rewards that you can get for the production that you have with us. Otherwise, just reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to explain the program to you as well. With that being said, super excited about our topic because personally, this is a new one for me. There might be somebody on the call that has already heard about this, but when it was first introduced to me recently, it was something that I thought was worth sharing with everybody else as something unique and not something that we've personally presented on at Financial Brokerage before. So with that being said, I'll be quiet now, and I'm going to kick it over to Allison to take it away.
Sure. And Charlene, did you want to introduce yourself before I get into the content?
No, that's perfect. I appreciate it. Charlene Werther. So I'm one of the regional vice presidents at Nationwide, working directly with Financial Brokerage. So anything that you need help with from Financial Brokerage, they can reach out to me, and then I can coordinate and bring people like Allison to the table for you. So super excited to have Allison with us today. And again, as Tim mentioned, great content here on new wealth transfer. And thanks, Allison. I'll let you take it.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, plug for Charlene. She's one of my favorite people here at Nationwide to work with. We're on some committees together at Nationwide, and she's always bringing ideas and willing to work and help. So I'm so happy to be able to do this to support your advisors. Thanks for everything you do, Charlene.
Thank you.
I see Justin's on the line, Charlene's internal partner, Justin Billy. Thanks for joining, Justin. We have 10 attendees today, so definitely, like Tim said, feel free to type in your questions, and I think we can most likely get to them all over the next 30-40 minutes or so. I'll say hi to you guys. Larry Estes, thank you, Larry, for joining. Kimlin Johnson, Kevin Hoops, welcome. Kathy Quattracci, Kathleen Pitcher, thanks for joining. Gerald Monahan and Edward Kelly, thank you. And at the top of my list, I have David Cohen. So thanks you all for joining. My name's Allison Hoyt. I'm part of the advanced sales team here at Nationwide. So I help anyone and everyone selling a nationwide life insurance product. I help consult on cases. I write marketing materials, white papers and PowerPoints, and I do speaking engagements like this to train financial and other professionals. And some of you may have heard of this sales idea before that we call here at Nationwide the new wealth transfer. And it's really intended to help get everyone thinking estate planning and long-term care insurance, right? I think it's easy and intuitive to think estate planning and life insurance, but I'm going to make some arguments today in this session that we really need to equate estate planning with life insurance and long-term care insurance. So that's what we'll be talking about today. This has been one, if not the most successful sales idea at Nationwide, I'd say, for the last year or two. The advisors with whom I work presented this at the Forum 400 meeting earlier this year at the AIN brokerage conference. So it'll make you think. So if you have comments or questions, definitely share them. It's also a good presentation to use with estate planning attorneys. And I'll move along on the slide here and explain. This is our standard disclosure slide. We don't provide tax, legal, or investment advice. Your clients always need to get that from their own attorneys. Charlene and I are happy to do conference calls with any of the attorneys with whom you work to discuss this concept. And the reason why my colleague and I created this presentation was we were asked to deliver remarks to the Washington, D.C. Estate Planning Council. So when we developed this presentation, we're talking to primarily a group of estate planning attorneys. Well, that's not this audience, so I'm not going to go through the first bullet, the different types of long-term care products during this session. I always emphasize to my advisors when you're working with an attorney, regardless of the type, here it's an estate planning attorney, you are the life insurance expert. And it was very helpful for the attorneys to hear about the different innovations in long-term care insurance that we're all likely very familiar with, right? So we started with the standalone or traditional long-term care insurance product. We've have an annuity with a long-term care rider. We have life insurance with a long-term care rider. And the newest innovation is that asset-based or linked benefit long-term care insurance product. And I'm not the product expert at Nationwide. That I defer to Charlene and Justin for all product issues. But for purposes of this presentation, because we're talking about estate planning, the most efficient products to use are either going to be the life insurance policy with long-term care rider, or is going to be that linked benefit long-term care product. At Nationwide, we call ours Care Matters. So that's all I really need to say about long-term care products. We'll spend most of our time talking about two different sales ideas, which go into how do we position long-term care insurance in the estate plans of the mass affluent, and then how do we position long-term care insurance in the estate tax plans of the high net worth. So two different sales ideas. I'll explain how I define those two groups as we go through. All right, so here is some data from the Spectrum Group's Wealth in America survey. This is from 2019, and some of it's from 2015, 2016. So the first two rows show households with a net worth between $100,000 and $5 million. And those are the two rows that I'm going to refer to as our mass affluent households, our mass affluent clients. They have a household net worth between $100,000 and $5 million. And there are over 40 million such mass affluent households in the United States. And I think it's also important to kind of weave into that definition. These households are not very likely under current law to be exposed to the federal estate tax. The mass affluent are, the majority of them, likely your clients. Now, our mass affluent households and clients did face federal estate tax exposure at some point in time. Here I've charted what the federal estate tax exemption has been since 2000 and what it's kind of projected to be out until 2030. And that red line, horizontal line, is the $5 million mark. So the maximum net worth of our mass affluent clients. Now in the early 2000s, they had more wealth and they were over the federal estate tax exemption. Back in 2000, I think the exemption was only about $675,000. Back in 2009, it was only about $3.5 million. Today, fast forward to 2022, it's never been this high in our history. It is $12,060,000 this year. We know or think that under current law, in 2026, it's going to go down to $5 million indexed for inflation. And before all of this rampant inflation, which I thought we were told was going to be transitory, but anyway, you know, I've heard that $6 million was what people were talking about the exemption will be in 2026. Again, that was before we've had unprecedented inflation over the past few months. But back to my story here. So our mass affluent clients at one point in time were advised to put their life insurance policies into irrevocable trusts for the purpose of helping them pay any federal estate taxes or to avoid any federal estate taxes. So it is kind of not unheard of today. Maybe some of you actually have had experiences like this and have clients, you know, they're 5 million or under net worth, but they have their life insurance in irrevocable trusts, ILITs, irrevocable life insurance trusts. And if you've spoken with any of these people today, they may have what we call ILIT remorse. They're like, wait, why did I do this? Why do I have a trust? Why did I get life insurance for the estate tax? I'm only worth 5 million. I've got a $12 million exemption. All right, well, you did it for good reason. So an irrevocable trust is a great asset to have, is a great estate planning tool to put assets in. Provides creditor protection for those assets. They avoid probate at the grantor's death. It's a private transfer of wealth versus a will, which is a public transfer of wealth. And irrevocable trusts are great to name as beneficiaries of other assets, which to the extent they remain in trust can provide creditor protection for the next generation and potentially professional money management. So, you know, this trust and the life insurance in there is pretty good, regardless of the presence or absence of an estate tax, what you did here. And, you know, the estate tax exemption is a favorite political football, and we really don't know what the exemption is going to be in the year that you, Mr. or Ms. Client, pass away. And wouldn't it be a kicker that we dismantle this planning, and lo and behold, in the year you pass away, you're exposed to an estate tax. So we need to think about that. you know, all of that is very logical, but it may not be enough to persuade these mass affluent households to retain their trusts and the policies within them. So let's take it up a notch. Let's consider another trend that's been impacting wealth in America for essentially the last 30 years or so. And that trend impacting American wealth is American health. And this slide's going to ask you some pop quiz questions here. What do you think? How has mortality changed as a result of the following health conditions since the year 2000, up or down? So basically, are deaths as a result of breast cancer since 2000 up or down? And this one I was surprised, they're actually up, but only slightly, only by 0.5%. When we look at heart attack and stroke, deaths as a result of heart attack and stroke since 2000 are down. More people are surviving these medical events, but may be in an impaired condition thereafter, whether mentally or physically. Deaths from heart attack have dropped by about 9%, and deaths from stroke by about 13%. And finally, this one should come as no surprise, deaths as a result of Alzheimer's since 2000 are up, and they're up dramatically by 145%. I've heard it said, maybe you've heard it as well, that we are living longer, but dying slower. The medical events that previously would kill us, there are better chances of survival. And Alzheimer's seems to strike at more advanced ages. And, you know, we have folks in our family who have Alzheimer's. I'm sure you have a family member or at least a friend or know someone suffering with Alzheimer's. And that strikes at very advanced ages. I believe 80-ish is around the time of onset on average. And people can live another, 5 to 8 years with the condition. The longer you live, it is very true that you will need long-term care supports and services. The stat that you may be familiar with is that someone turning age 65 today has nearly a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care supports and services. And my final factoid is between 1980 and 2010, 66% more people are living to age 100. I think at one point, Ohio could say that we had the oldest person, but she passed away within the last few years. So if we put these trends in American wealth as far as ILIT and American health together, an interesting picture emerges for our mass affluent households. And the estate tax drops out of the picture. Like, it's almost irrelevant, the federal estate tax exemption for these households. But their ability to transfer wealth is going to still be diminished, and perhaps significantly so, because the costs of care, of long-term care, have become the new estate tax for the mass affluent. What do I mean by that? I mean that the largest threat to wealth transfer planning for the mass affluent today are the costs of long-term care. Instead of 40% of their estate above an exemption going to the IRS, that same or similar amounts end up going to the LTC. And here are some stats from Columbus, Ohio, Genworth's cost of care survey. A private nursing home room costs about $100,000 a year. A assisted living facility about $54,000 a year, and home health aid about $55,000 a year. Well, if someone needs care for 5 years, you're looking at potentially over $500,000 in a nursing home bill, or $200,000 to $300,000 in a home health aid or assisted living facility. Now, if we were telling our clients to insure for an estate tax liability of these amounts, why wouldn't we also tell them to insure for a long-term care liability of similar amounts? And so back to our mass affluent households with ILIT remorse, we want them to keep those ILITs for all of the reasons I previously stated, but we can repurpose them for the costs of long-term care. It's really easy to do that. All they would need to do is either add a long-term care rider to that product. You can do that with certain life insurance products, add a long-term care rider post-issue. I believe, and Charlene, if I'm wrong, just interrupt, I believe you can do that with nationwide life insurance products. You don't need to have chosen the long-term care rider ab initio at application.
Absolutely correct. And there's only 2, I think, that I know for sure that can do that. We are one.
Yeah, it's a great feature. And yes, you're right, not many carriers seem to allow it. But if you do have one of those flexible contracts, that's great. If you don't, what would have to happen is a 1035 exchange. And the rub, of course, with either of those is that your client's going to need to be insurable for long-term care to add a long-term care rider, or they need to be insurable for life insurance to do the 1035 exchange. But assuming that they are, probably right now in their early 60s and doing okay, late 50s, for many people, I think that it is possible to repurpose those ILITs. Now, fast forward into the future in 10, 20, 30 years, and lo and behold, your recommendation has prepared your clients for a future long-term care event. Now, what happens if the insured does have a long-term care event when we have the policy with the long-term care benefits in the irrevocable trust and not owned by the insured? So if you know anything about ILITs, you know that the trust is the owner of the product, and nationwide, like many other carriers, we're going to pay those long-term care benefits to the policy owner. In this case, that is the trustee. And Charlene will, hit me if I don't mention our long-term care benefits with all of our products at Nationwide. The rider and our care matters are cash indemnity. That's how we pay our benefits. So long-term care benefits are payable to the trustee of the trust. Now, the person who needs those benefits, the insured, that person created the trust, is the grantor of the trust. That person is not a trust beneficiary. So it's not as easy as the trustee taking the long-term care benefits and handing them over to the grantor. In fact, that is not allowable. So how do we get the long-term care benefits from the trust to the insured grantor who needs them? And the first place you would want to look is the so-called SLAT or BLAT provisions in the trust. Spousal Lifetime Access Trust, SLAT, or Beneficiary Lifetime Access Trust, or BLAT, with the idea being that the trustee can distribute those long-term care benefits to a spouse, that's a trust beneficiary, or other trust beneficiary, normally the insured child. And then the spouse or child can share those long-term care benefits with the insured grantor. So the first place I would look for our mass affluent clients is, does this trust have SLAT or BLAT provisions? If so, The trustee merely has to make a distribution to that person who can then share those benefits with the insured grantor. Now, not all trusts, not all ILITs have SLAT or BLAT provisions, although many of them do. If the trust doesn't have those provisions, we have a backup mechanism. The trustee can merely loan those long-term care benefits to the grantor insured, and then the grantor insured uses them for their care. A trustee is empowered in virtually every trust that I've reviewed, ILITs. A trustee is empowered to make loans to any person. So that would be the thought process in case your client ever does have a future long-term care event. We can get those benefits out of the trust through either the SLAT or BLAT provisions or some loans. Okay. So Tim, I'll pause here because that is the end of the mass affluent sales idea.
Yep. Thanks, Allison. And we do not have any questions yet. As a reminder for those in the audience, if you do have any questions, please use that question box and I will see them come through as you type them up. And I just want to thank you, Allison, for mentioning the ILIT remorse and reminding everybody what can, may, probably will happen with estate tax exemptions and some of the reasons even before this sales idea to keep those ILITs in place, as we've been having those conversations with agents and their clients as well. But no questions so far, so I will let you take it away.
All right, great. And you know, if I've heard some financial professionals be very successful working with estate planning attorneys that have clients with ILITs and offering to review them. So that's another kind of avenue to have these discussions through the client if they come to you directly or through the estate planning attorney. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about our high net worth clients. And the way I'll define high net worth is an individual or a couple with federal estate tax exposure. Okay, so if you have a high net worth couple households today, you know, man, there aren't many of them out there, statistically speaking, right? You have to be over 12 million as an individual to pay any federal estate taxes today. You have to be over 24 million if you're a married couple. But just know, under current law, you know, in 2026, the number's coming back down to earth a little bit, and the federal estate tax will impact, I don't want to say a lot more households because I don't think that's accurate, but it will impact more households. So if you have clients that are not likely to die in the next few years, the numbers that you should concern yourself with are, you know, hey, do I have any single clients that are now worth over 6 million, you know, maybe even 5 million, depending on how old they are and a projection of the growth of that estate. So, you know, in your head, I would think, you know, do I have any clients worth over 6 million that are single, or 12 million if married? So those are our high net worth clients. They are exposed, they have exposure to the federal estate tax. And, you know, they are going to kind of raise an eyebrow when you suggest buying long-term care insurance. Buying long-term care insurance, I can just pay for it myself. You know, heck, I could buy the nursing home if I really wanted to. Why would I buy long-term care insurance? Okay, now I don't disagree with those statements, except why they should buy long-term care insurance. But just because they can pay for it doesn't mean they should. You know, the magic of insurance leverage works for everyone. It's a good financial decision. But if you unpack what they're saying, that they'll just pay for it themselves, well, that kind of has an embedded cost for them. And at Nationwide, we call that the cost of getting lucky. Now, again, these folks are exposed to the federal estate tax. So any monies that they are keeping in their estate, and probably more or less pretty liquid, are going to be exposed to the federal estate tax if they're not used for long-term care costs, right? That's a win-lose situation. They win because they don't use that money for long-term care, but they lose because 40% of it is going to the federal government in the form of estate taxes. So whatever they're thinking, they're going to pay, up that by potentially 40%. We want to focus on making win-win solutions where we can protect more of their assets from the estate tax and pass more wealth onto their families. And here's just a simple example of the cost of getting lucky. Let's say that they're keeping an extra $1 million in their estate liquid in case they have a long-term care event. They're going to use that money. Well, if they end up, using all or most of that $1 million, their plan has worked well enough. None of that money is going to be hit with the 40% estate tax. But if they end up using none or very little of that $1 million, that's great. They died peacefully in their sleep one night. They did not use that money for the cost of long-term care. They still lose because 40% of it, $400,000, is going to the IRS in the form of estate taxes. And that's what we call the cost of getting lucky. These monies not spent on long-term care expenses are going to be lost, 40% of them, to the estate tax. And how can long-term care insurance potentially create a better outcome for our high net worth clients? Well, we want them to do the same thing that we want our mass affluent clients to do. We want them to add some kind of long-term care solution to their ILITs. Now, these clients won't be arguing to get rid of their ILITs. They don't have ILIT remorse. They understand, hey, I'm still exposed to a federal estate tax. So for them, you can look to either repurpose the existing policy that they have or policies by adding a long-term care rider or 1035ing to a policy with a long-term care rider or linked benefit product. But for the high net worth, you can also consider selling them an additional product, I think. That is can be a very reasonable solution for the high net worth. There's a lot of confusion I find in the industry on this point, indemnity versus reimbursement style long-term care benefit payments. Both of them can be used in trusts, but what I would say is financially the most beneficial, especially for this strategy, it would have to be cash indemnity, because the strategy that I'm going to explain works the best if we can get the most long-term care benefits from the product. And with an indemnity style, cash indemnity style benefit, you can get up to the maximum monthly benefit. Whereas with reimbursement, you're limited to what the actual long-term care expenses are. Now, we're going to combine the long-term care insurance with loans from the trust. And the presence of these loans will reduce the value of the grantor's estate and therefore reduce the amount of estate taxes ultimately paid. So any long-term care benefits payable to the trust can be shared with the grantor through loans. These are bona fide loans. They should have collateral. There should be an interest rate charged, and I'll explain to you how we would have you consider, have the attorney consider structuring the interest rate. And the loan should be repaid in full. Ideally, I don't even want to say ideally. If it's prior to death, that's great. If it's after death, there's a small income tax payable, but the strategy still works really well. So let me walk you through a hypothetical situation of combining the long-term care benefits with a series of loans from ILITs to help our high net worth clients mitigate the estate tax. And here's your client, Jane. She has done all the things. She has an ILIT. She's made lifetime gifts. She's done flips. She's done grats. She's done it all, and she's still going to have an estate tax liability at her death. That's just how wealthy she is. And it's projected to be about $5 million. So the estate planning attorney and you have created an ILIT with a $5 million policy. You explained to Jane, Jane, we can improve upon this planning actually and reduce the amount of estate taxes your estate pays, increasing the amount of money that goes to your family and the trust if we add some kind of long-term care insurance to this trust. So she says, okay, let's do it. So you add a long-term care rider, $1 million, to the policy and the ILIT. And if she ever needs long-term care, what the loan will look like, she'll use her vacation home as the collateral. Anything can be used as the collateral as long as it matches the amount of, matches or exceeds. You can over collateralize something, that's not an issue. The amount of benefits paid. The interest rate charged is going to be 7%. And that is from the guaranteed loan interest rate in the policy plus 1%. So remember, we want to create the largest defensible legitimate debt in her estate as possible, because that's the way we're going to save the maximum amount of long-term, save the maximum amount of estate taxes. So we do think that it is within the trustee's fiduciary discretion to charge a 7% interest rate. And in our example, we're going to assume that the whole thing is paid back just days prior to her death. Again, it's okay if the loan's not paid back prior to death. There will be a small income tax payable if it's paid back after the insured's death. All right, so Jane repurposed her ILIT to help provide some long-term care benefits, and lo and behold, she does have a long-term care event. The result is that Nationwide will pay the maximum monthly benefit to the trust. Here, let's assume that's $10,000. After Nationwide pays those benefits, the trustee is able, through a series of loans, it only needs to be one master loan agreement drafted by the attorney, and Jane will borrow funds from the trust. She borrows the full $1 million, and she takes a turn for the worse. And her attorneys, someone like Jonathan Blattmarker or a Marty Schenkman, they're consulted, prior to her death with the news that she doesn't have much time, maybe a day, and they say repay the loan. So the loan gets repaid prior to Jane's death, and thereafter she passes away. Now, at the time the loan was repaid, there was that $1 million outstanding of principal, and there was accrued interest of $352,000. So we took $1.352 million from her estate and moved it into the trust, totally estate tax free. The result at Jane's death, well, the death benefit remaining on the policy in the ILIT is paid to the trust, $4 million. We accelerated the $1 million of long-term care. The trust gets the $1.352 million from the estate, and moving that amount saved Jane's estate over $500,000 of estate taxes. So for our high net worth clients, you can look at that $1.352 million as if we've given Jane another $1.352 million of estate tax exemption. That's money that is sheltered from the estate tax thanks to the combination of long-term care benefits and using loans. And I will say, I'm going to update this example. I think a better way to get a bigger debt instead of accruing the interest is to capitalize the interest every year. So you could probably get that 1.352 easily over 1.5 million. And you should know at Nationwide, our max long-term care benefit on the long-term care rider is 1.5 million, although we can go up to 2 million in an exceptional case. And if your client's looking to get more than 1.5 or $2 million of long-term care benefits, then the product to use would be that linked benefit long-term care product. At Nationwide, it's called Care Matters, because you can get over $2 million of long-term care benefits if you include various inflation-adjusted riders. So you could potentially double the estate tax savings depending on the max monthly benefits that are paid out. All right, so that is the sales idea for our high net worth clients. Not having them see long-term care insurance, just for the sake of long-term care insurance, although it's a smart financial decision for them. But to see it as an estate tax mitigation technique where we can significantly lower the federal estate taxes they pay and transfer more wealth to their families. Hopefully that will get their attention. That one's a little more technical, so if there's any questions on those, Tim, I'm happy to chime in and address them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say we did get a kind of a general question here as far as what's the definition of a mass affluent client, which might be a little bit subjective, but maybe Allison, if you want to share, exactly what, I know you talked about the estate tax exclusion limit and clients having assets over those amounts being the targets for this concept. I don't know if you have anything to add there that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think just briefly, a mass affluent client is someone not exposed to the federal estate tax, or the not likely exposed to the federal estate tax. So I would say someone who's worth $1 million now, 2 million now, 3 million now, depending on age, but still, and married couples worth $1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. They're not likely to face exposure to the federal estate tax, is how I would distinguish the mass affluent from the high net worth.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think, it's always a helpful reminder. I know you shared the slide about the changing evolution of what that estate tax exclusion amount is. I'm not, as everybody can tell by my haircut, I'm not brand new in the business, but when I was first licensed in meeting clients, the estate tax exclusion amount was $1 million. And so it wasn't all that long ago. It wasn't yesterday, but it wasn't all that long ago. And so we never know. It's not predicted to get that low again, as Allison mentioned, but certainly keep in mind that we don't know for sure. So And if anybody on the call, I was thinking to myself as we go through this, not saying that anybody is doing this, but sometimes when we have presentations about working with high net worth clients or estate planning concepts, business planning concepts, sometimes we get some of the audience thinking to themselves, or sometimes thinking out loud as well, well, I don't have any clients like that, or, that's not what my client base looks like. And Allison shared, I think, a good way to, if you do want clients like that, this is your in as far as reaching out to those estate planning attorneys, sharing this concept and asking them, simply, do you have any ILITs in place today that could use a review for this particular concept? I know that, a lot of these were planned around life insurance for the estate tax amount specifically, and if they haven't planned for long-term care with inside of that, it's not necessarily all that likely that somebody has already talked to them about that. So that's a good way to get in front of those clients as you're in. So I'll just throw that in there as well. We did get kind of a general question is when would you recommend an irrevocable trust? I'll take a stab at, I think, Allison, you kind of just answered that again, but that's those clients with those amount of assets that are approaching that estate tax exclusion amount. If I said anything wrong there, Allison, jump in and correct me.
No, yeah, I mean, my default when it comes to life insurance planning is the owner is the insured. Right? It's not sexy, it's not complicated, it's not that. You have to give me a reason to depart from that. So why would I even consider an irrevocable trust owning a life insurance policy? Primarily, it's for federal estate tax purposes. Secondarily, and I don't see this very much, would be for creditor protection.
Okay, yeah, that's another good point. I think that's it for the call. We did get a question on critical, chronic, and terminal illness compared to long-term care riders. I could follow up with you directly after the call on that, Kimlin.
Yeah, I would never, I will just say I would never try to substitute what a long-term care rider does and, tell someone they've got something just as good with living benefits. Living benefits are great to have on products, but it's not a long-term care rider. So just be careful.
Sure. Yeah, and absolutely. And the reason why I want to follow up with after the call is we could do an entire webinar on the different types of critical, chronic, long-term care. We could do an entire webinar on just the different types of long-term care riders specifically. So that can get very nuanced. And absolutely agree with you, Allison. If you're using something specifically for the purposes of planning for long-term care, it should be traditional long-term care, a true long-term care rider, or some type of hybrid policy. Those chronic and critical illness riders can be a great add-on if that's not maybe the primary planning purpose.
And I heard Charlene. I was wondering, Charlene, did anything stick out to you? Any insights, maybe from product or other perspective, after hearing these sales ideas?
Yeah, so I do want to just toss a couple, because I know a lot of times when you mention high net worth, or people are like, oh, the self-insured. But remember two things. Number one is they understand leverage better than the rest of us. They surely didn't amount to the wealth that they're sitting at because they don't understand it. So we kind of use the long-term care as a stopgap. So, okay, they want to go in for $1 million, or they want to go in for $500,000, and then we will insure the rest of it. And the other one is we actually did a long-term care survivorship case on I can't remember her net worth, 50, 60 million, and she was getting ready to inherit another 10 or 20. And really the advisor said, okay, why? Why do you want long-term care insurance? And she said, look, I don't want my kids' inheritance to be disturbed by what they have to spend on me for long-term care. Or in reverse, I don't want my long-term care services to suffer because they don't want to spend it on me. They want to inherit it. And maybe that doesn't say a lot about her kids, but she put the plan in place to make sure she got the Taj Mahal and they still had the money that they needed. So I think that's a good thing to remember. And, you know, we do certainly then, of course, in the other sales idea, we do see that repurposing. What I would say to you too, in working with an attorney here just a few years ago who holds himself out as a long-term care attorney. So he helps you plan for that once that need is arised. He had no idea, and this is personal because we went in to help my mom who is in a facility. He had no idea the offerings out there in the insurance world from a long-term care standpoint. So that just wasn't his bailiwick. Nothing saying anything bad about him, but so just don't assume that those estate planning attorneys are up to date on what the long-term care options are.
Great points, yeah.
Great insight. Okay. We did not get any other questions coming through, so I'm sure that if you think of questions after the fact, please reach out to me directly. If I can't answer those questions, I have Charlene and Allison as resources that we can follow up with on the back end. So appreciate everybody's time today. Any other final thoughts, Allison or Charlene?
No, just thank you very much for the time, and we can get you a copy of the slides, and there's a white paper if anyone's interested. That might be a good door opener with the to send to the attorneys.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to send that out to the group if somebody wants to forward that to me. Very appreciative. All right, well then I'll wrap up there. Thank you everybody for your time today. Thank you Charlene and Allison, especially for your time. Great concept to share in our Life Long-Term Care Planning series. And we'll see everybody next week, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.